The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, thin and relentless, turning the narrow roads outside Millbrook into slick ribbons of black glass. Daniel Harper leaned forward over the steering wheel of his aging pickup truck, squinting through the blur of water and headlights. The windshield wipers squeaked back and forth in a tired rhythm, barely keeping up. It was past midnight, and exhaustion pressed against his skull like a tightening band. In the back seat, his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, slept curled against the door, her small fingers wrapped around the strap of her pink backpack. A math worksheet poked out of the zipper. Daniel's chest tightened at the sight of it. He had promised her they would finish it together after dinner. Instead, his shift had run late again. "Soon, baby," he murmured, though she couldn't hear him. "We're almost home." He took the long route through. Route 16 because it shaved 7 minutes off the drive. 7 minutes meant maybe catching 4 hours of sleep before doing it all again. That's when he saw the flicker. At first, it looked like lightning reflecting off the wet pavement. Then it blinked again. Red, blue, red. Daniel slowed instinctively. Up ahead, a patrol car sat crooked against a splintered wooden fence. One front tire sunk deep into the ditch. One headlight was shattered, casting a broken beam across the rain-slick grass. The emergency light still spun weakly, painting the storm in flashes of color. His pulse spiked. "Stay here," he whispered, glancing back as Lily stirred. He gently reached over and locked the doors. "Don't open this truck unless I tell you, okay?" Her sleepy eyes blinked open. "Daddy?" "It's okay. Just stay put." The rain hit him hard the moment he stepped outside, soaking through his jacket in seconds. Mud sucked at his boots as he jogged toward the wrecked patrol car. "Hello?" he shouted over the storm. "Officer?" The driver's door hung open. The interior light flickered. The air smelled metallic. Then he saw her. She lay several feet from the vehicle, half in the ditch, half on the grass. Her dark hair was plastered to her face. Her uniform was drenched, and darker near her side. Daniel's stomach dropped. He hurried to her side and knelt carefully, his knees sinking into cold mud. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her breathing was shallow, ragged. He could see the rise and fall of her chest, faint, uneven. There was blood. It mixed with rainwater and streamed down into the ditch. The sight nearly paralyzed him. He wasn't trained for this. He stocked boxes in a warehouse. He paid bills late. He burned toast. This wasn't his world. But leaving wasn't an option. He fumbled for his phone with trembling fingers and dialed 911. "There's an officer down on Route 16 near the Miller farm," he said urgently. "She's been shot. I think she's been shot. She's alive, but barely." "Stay with her," the dispatcher instructed. "Units are on their way. Apply pressure to the wound if you can." Daniel didn't hesitate. He shrugged out of his flannel shirt despite the freezing rain and pressed it firmly against the bleeding at her side. Warmth soaked into the fabric instantly. "It's going to be okay," he said, though his voice shook. "You're not alone." Her eyelids fluttered. For a moment, he thought she might be gone. Then her fingers twitched. Slowly, weakly, her hand closed around his wrist. Her eyes opened halfway, unfocused but aware. "Hey," he said gently. "Stay with me." Her lips parted, but only a broken whisper came out. "They inside." Daniel leaned closer, straining to hear her over the rain. "Inside where?" She swallowed painfully. "Evidence, trunk." Her grip tightened slightly. "Don't trust." Her words faded into a cough, and Daniel felt fear creep up his spine. "Don't trust who?" he asked urgently. A sharp crack echoed from somewhere behind him. Daniel froze. It wasn't thunder. It was the snap of a branch. Slowly, carefully, he turned his head. A figure stood near the rear of the patrol car, partially obscured by darkness and rain. The flashing emergency lights painted him in alternating red and blue. Another officer. At least, that's what Daniel assumed when he saw the badge clipped at the man's belt. Relief flooded him for half a second until he met the man's eyes. They weren't panicked. They weren't rushed. They were calculating. "Step away from her," the officer said calmly. Something about the tone made Daniel's skin prickle. "I'm helping her," Daniel replied. "She's been shot." "Ambulance is coming." The man took a step closer, boots splashing through puddles. "I said step away." Daniel hesitated. The wounded officer's fingers tightened weakly around his wrist again. Please, she breathed. The man's gaze flicked to her hand, gripping Daniel's arm. His jaw flexed. In the distance, faint sirens began to wail. Back up! For the first time, the standing officer looked unsettled. His eyes darted toward the road, calculating. Daniel followed his movement and noticed something else. The officer casually shifted toward the patrol car's trunk. He opened it, only for a second. But Daniel saw enough to know he was removing something, small and rectangular, before shutting it again. The rain masked the sound. The sirens grew louder, rapidly approaching. The man stepped backward into the shadows. You didn't see anything, he said quietly. Daniel's pulse roared in his ears. Then the officer turned and disappeared into the darkness just as the first patrol. Cars screeched onto the scene. Headlights flooded the ditch. Doors slammed. Voices shouted commands. Hands up! Step away from her! Before Daniel could react, two officers grabbed him, yanking him backward and forcing him to the ground. Mud filled his mouth. Gold metal cuffs snapped around his wrists. I was helping her, he shouted. She was alive when I found her. No one listened. Paramedics rushed past him toward the injured officer. One of them cut away his flannel shirt to apply proper pressure. Daniel twisted his head just enough to see her being loaded onto a stretcher. Her face was pale. Still, an officer he hadn't seen before walked straight to the damaged patrol car. To the trunk. He opened it briefly, then closed it quickly. Too quickly. Daniel's breath caught. The sirens continued to wail, rain continued to fall, and flashing lights turned the night into chaos. Through it all, one terrifying thought lodged itself in his mind. The most dangerous person on that road tonight might not have been the shooter, and as they lifted Daniel to his feet and led him toward a patrol car, he realized something else. He had just stepped into something far bigger than a roadside accident, and someone didn't want him there. The interrogation room smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. Daniel sat hunched over the cold metal table, his damp jeans stiff against his skin, dried mud still clinging to the cuffs. The fluorescent light above flickered every few seconds, casting brief shadows that made the small room feel even smaller. His wrists were red where the handcuffs had dug in. He had never been inside a police station before. Now he couldn't leave one. Across from him, Detective Harris flipped through a thin folder that held everything they had on him, which Daniel suspected wasn't much. Warehouse employee, widower, no criminal record. One speeding ticket from 5 years ago. You expect me to believe, Harris said flatly, that you just happened to drive by at midnight and found Officer Reyes bleeding in a ditch? Daniel swallowed. His throat was dry despite the water they had given him. Yes, that's exactly what happened. And the other officer you claim you saw? I'm not claiming anything. I saw him. Harris leaned back in his chair, studying him. Funny, no one else reported seeing anyone. Daniel's jaw tightened. Because he'd left before they arrived. The detective closed the folder slowly. Or because he was never there. Frustration surged through Daniel's chest. Why would I make that up? Before Harris could answer, the door opened. A woman stepped inside, her presence immediately shifting the air in the room. She wore Captain Bars on her shoulders and carried herself with calm authority. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, and her expression was controlled but sharp. "Leave us," she said to Harris. "Ma'am?" Harris hesitated. That wasn't a suggestion. Harris stood and exited without another word. The captain closed the door behind him and pulled out the chair across from Daniel. She didn't open a file. She didn't glare. She simply looked at him. "My name is Captain Elena Morales," she said, "and I owe you an apology." Daniel blinked. "For what?" "For how you were treated." He didn't respond. He didn't know how to. She folded her hands on the table. "Officer Maria Reyes is alive." The words hit him like a sudden breath after being underwater. "She is?" he asked. "Critical condition. Bullet passed dangerously close to her heart. Surgery lasted 3 hours. She's stable for now." Daniel exhaled shakily, tension draining from his shoulders. "Before she went under anesthesia," Morales continued, "she said something very specific." Daniel felt his pulse quicken again. "She said, 'The man who helped me, protect him.'" Silence stretched between them. Daniel stared at the table. "Protect me from who?" Morales didn't answer right away. Instead, she slid a photograph across the table. It was a still frame pulled from a patrol car dash camera. The image was grainy from rain and darkness, but Daniel recognized the outline immediately. "That's him," Daniel said quietly. "That's the officer I saw." Morales nodded once. "Sergeant Adrian Cole." Daniel's stomach turned. He opened the trunk. Morales's eyes sharpened. "You're sure?" "Yes." She leaned back slowly, absorbing that. "Officer Reyes has been working undercover for 6 months," Morales said finally. "Internal Affairs suspected financial discrepancies in several high-value drug busts. Evidence money wasn't adding up." Daniel listened, heart pounding. "Maria volunteered to go deep," Morales continued. "She gained trust. She gathered proof." "The trunk," Daniel whispered. Morales gave a small nod. "We believe she had secured a hard drive containing transaction records and recorded conversations." Daniel felt cold. "When officers secured the scene," Morales said, her voice tightening, "the trunk was empty. And Sergeant Cole was there first," Daniel finished. "Yes." The weight of that truth settled heavily in the room. "You think he shot her?" Daniel asked. "We don't think," Morales replied carefully. "We are beginning to suspect." A knock came at the door. Harris stepped inside, tension etched across his face. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "Internal Affairs is requesting immediate access to Sergeant Cole's locker and financial records." Morales didn't look surprised. "Authorize it." Harris hesitated. "This is going to explode." "It already has," she said. The next 48 hours felt unreal to Daniel. He wasn't allowed to leave town, not officially accused, but not free either. They kept him nearby for his safety. He didn't argue. From a quiet corner of the station, he watched as the department unraveled. Internal Affairs officers combed through paperwork. Phones were seized. Patrol schedules were cross-referenced. Bank accounts were frozen. Whispers filled hallways. By the second day, 3 officers were placed on administrative leave. By the third, Sergeant Cole was in custody. The break came from something simple, a traffic camera half a mile from the crash site. It showed Cole's patrol car parked on the shoulder nearly 15 minutes before. Daniel's truck arrived. 15 minutes no one could explain. Then forensic analysts found traces of blood inside. Cole's vehicle that matched Reyes. When confronted, Cole's composure cracked. The hard drive was eventually recovered from a storm drain behind his house, and what it contained shocked the entire department. Recorded conversations, ledger spreadsheets, names, amounts siphoned from seized drug money over 4 years. It wasn't one corrupt officer. It was a ring. Veterans, decorated names, officers people trusted, all exposed because one undercover cop refused to look away. And one exhausted single father refused to drive past flashing lights in the rain. 3 days after the arrest, Daniel stood in his small living room, staring out the window at something he never expected to see. 5 patrol cars lined his quiet street. Neighbors peeked through curtains. Lily clung to his leg. "Daddy, are you in trouble again?" He knelt and smiled gently. "No, sweetheart, I think they're here for something else." A knock echoed through the house. When he opened the door, Captain Morales stood there in full-dress uniform. Behind her were 24 officers, solemn and silent. For a terrifying second, Daniel thought something had gone wrong. Then Morales stepped forward holding a small velvet box. "Daniel Harper," she said clearly, loud enough for the gathered officers to hear, "on behalf of the Millbrook Police Department, we thank you." She opened the box. Inside rested a civilian commendation medal for extraordinary bravery and integrity in the face of danger. Daniel shook his head. "I just stopped to help." Morales gave him a faint smile. Most people don't. The officers behind her began to clap, not politely, not reluctantly, but fully. The sound filled the street. Lily stared wide-eyed at the flashing lights reflecting off their modest home. Weeks later, when Officer Maria Reyes was strong enough to stand on her own, she returned to the station. Her steps were slow but steady. The entire department gathered in the briefing room. Daniel stood awkwardly near the back, unsure where to look. Reyes approached the podium, pale but determined, a thin scar traced just beneath her collarbone. She looked out at her fellow officers. "Integrity isn't about wearing a badge," she said quietly. "It's about doing the right thing when no one is watching." Then her eyes found Daniel. "If he hadn't stopped," she continued, "I wouldn't be standing here." Silence hung in the air before applause erupted again, louder this time. But what truly shook the department wasn't just the arrests. It wasn't the scandal. It wasn't the headlines. It was the realization that their redemption hadn't come from within their ranks. It came from a tired, grieving single father who simply refused to look away. And that truth would stay with them far longer than the scandal ever would.